Welcome to 1E's webinar today. Thanks so much for joining. Today we have Mitigating the Impact, Leveraging 1E's Proactive IT Strategies to Minimize Software Outages. We're going to go through a Q&A with two of our guests here. But before I introduce them, let me first tell you who I am here and do a quick introduction. So hello, everyone. Again, thank you for joining. My name is Kat Catini, Director of Product Marketing here at 1E, and happy to run the webinar today. And I'll be asking just a few questions to our two special guests that we have. But yeah, thanks for joining. Before I do intro our experts here for the webinar, there is a Q&A, so I want to call that out. So if at any point you have a question that you would like to ask, definitely put it in the QA. I'm monitoring that right here on my screen, and we'll get to those questions at the end if we have time. So definitely feel free to put those in there. I can see those right now. That being said, let's go ahead and introduce our 1E experts. And 80, I'll let you introduce yourself first.
Thanks, Kat, and hi, everybody. Yeah, Adrian Todd, I'm a Senior Director in our product group at 1E. I've been with 1E for about 13 years now, started as a principal consultant. And before that, I spent about 20 years in the industry doing everything from help desk all the way through to system architecture. So really good to sort of talk about this subject today. Got about 30 years worth of experience moving lots of scenarios around how to manage IT, both from a customer as well as a vendor perspective. So hopefully today will give you some good insights about how to mature your strategies around running IT. Over to you, Jason.
Hi, I'm Jason Kyo, VP of Solutions here in 1E, been with 1E for just 10 years or so now. Just 10 years, a mere decade. I just referred, I'm so old, I had to refer to LinkedIn to check when it was I started first running an IT team, and it was actually in 1996, which is a ridiculous amount of time ago. And that was sort of as you know, IT manager for a software company, and I did that several times and ran different IT infrastructures, and you know, basically supporting very large banks typically for the first 10 years of my you know, working career. And then I started working in companies supporting other businesses like 1E, so working with our customers. And typically I've worked with our larger customers, and often, depending on which role I've been in over the last 10 years in 1E, it doesn't really matter which one. I've typically been working with the customers to find from them what their biggest challenges were, and then try and help them solve those challenges, typically using our software. But I've worked with IT leaders and people who are implementing IT, you know, in very large organizations all across the world, and have been doing that for yeah, too many decades to name. So nice to meet you all.
Great. Thank you both for those introductions. And now we'll dive into the questions. So the way that we're going to run this webinar today is that we have questions we have pre-planned on our end, and we'll have either 80 or Jason answer those and give their perspective on really the answer and what we're talking about here. I'll ask the questions. I'll choose who I think, if you guys don't mind, who can answer the best here. And we'll start with this question here. So something that we've had a lot of our customers, people we're speaking to in the market, ask this question is, can you explain the key differences between proactive and reactive strategies? And for this one, 80, I will go to you if you can help us out here.
No, definitely. Cool. Yeah, and I think to help explain this, it probably worth starting with a description of what reactive and proactive are. So reactive is typically when something happens and you as an individual are starting to react to that instance. So something has changed and you're being notified that that's been changed by someone who's impacted by that change. Whereas proactive is really having a person or a policy in place that is controlling the situation by making changes that are planned ahead of something occurring. For example, cleaning disk space before it becomes full, as an example of something. So from a proactive IT standpoint, it's about prevention, bringing in more of a frictionless IT sort of scenario, reducing the impact to our users ultimately, whether that's our customers or actually our internal employees. We want to make sure that the systems and processes are running smoothly all of the time with minimum impact. So the focus is really on maintenance and monitoring to identify and resolve issues before they happen. And that can be, fully automated, it can be procedural to start with. And we'll talk about some of those as we go through the conversation today about different scenarios. Whereas reactive is that user reporting or customer reporting a problem with a system that's failed. That could be from a customer point of view, that could be an order that's not being processed. It could be a bank transaction that's not happening. So it's not, proactive IT is not just about the employee, it's about the larger ecosystem that we want to try and make sure that our systems are available for when they're going to be used. And again, to reduce that pain point for either our customers or our employees. One thing that, to sort of give this a little bit more context as well, I like to try and bring in analogies and some real world examples that's not necessarily IT related. And it got me thinking about a blog I saw a few years ago. It was an Amazon blog about their transactional processes and making sure that they had sensors in place to make sure that those transactions were happening. And actually the blog takes you through a journey into one of the earliest sort of proactive processes, and that was in the coal mines. So in a coal mine, often as miners are extracting coal, they might come across a pocket of gas, which is obviously toxic to the human. So after a few tragedies, someone came up with the idea of actually having a proactive sensor in the form of a canary being in the mine with the miners. So what if the canary stops singing, stops chirping, actually they know something's wrong. The canary unfortunately dies, but they know something's wrong and they can get out of the situation before it becomes a critical situation. So I just like to sort of bring those types of things into the conversation when I talk about being proactive rather than reactive. So I hope that helps.
In caring mines, the miners would grab the canaries in the cages and run out with them before they died. But one thing that I just add to that answer that's not about canaries is really, I think, proactive strategies prevent business impact and reactive strategies deal with business impact. And prevention is definitely better than cure. So if we can get to a world where we have more proactive, we have less negative business impact. Whereas if we have reactive, we're just trying to be as good as we can at dealing with the negative business impact. So we want to avoid negative business impact, and that's proactive.
Great. Thank you both for that answer. That was really helpful. Good segue into our next question. Jason, I'll send this one over to you. Speaking about that reactive to proactive strategy, I know you just mentioned it, but what are the first steps an organization should take to transition from a reactive strategy to a proactive strategy?
Yeah, Adi basically mentioned, well, they didn't put these names on it, he sort of mentioned two types of actions that you can take to become proactive, right? So he mentioned things like cleaning out disk space so disks don't get full, so that patches work and deployments work and blah, blah, blah. There's lots of negative things that can happen. And I categorize that into an area called hygiene, right? So there's certain things that you can do that are, basic IT hygiene steps that you can put in automations for so that negative impacts don't hit the business, right? So that you're not needing to react to something that has negatively impacted a user. So good basic hygiene, preferably automated, is one. And the other, and that hygiene can be consistent and common across many different customers. So, there isn't anyone in the world running a computer who's going to benefit from running out of all their disk space. It doesn't happen, right? So then the other one is understand what is happening in your environment. Understand what are the major call drivers for your environment, and keep doing that. Right. So when you found something that's a call driver, implement, something to prevent that thing that is occurring from creating more calls, from having users need to log tickets, If it can be automated away, create an automation to automate it away. And those things might be very specific to a business. The things that are occurring in one organization won't necessarily occur in the next, because perhaps they're using different technologies, or they're configured in different ways or whatever, right? So there's sort of generic steps, which are the good hygiene, and then there's the specific to your business steps, which are find your call drivers, identify what they are, and identify that set that you can deal with through proactive strategies, and that set that you cannot, and deal with the ones you can. And that has to become an ongoing process, because if you implemented automations to proactively fix everything that happened to you yesterday, well, tomorrow none of those things will happen, and that's fantastic. But the only constant is change. So day after tomorrow, someone's going to release a new driver file that's going to cause all your machines to blue screen, or some random example like that. So, so the only constant is change. And even if you fix everything proactively, there will be more to do. So you have to keep that process up of looking at what's driving calls, and reacting to technology as it changes.
Great. Thank you, Jason. Yeah, it sounds like organizational context very important, and there's not sort of one size fits all with this. And it's really important to understand your business before going through reactive to proactive change there. Speaking of that, back to you, Jason, again. Could you share an example of a company, maybe one that you've worked with, that you saw successfully implement a proactive strategy and they saw significant improvements from that?
Sure. Look, there's actually quite a few. One of my favorites was a South African organization, and 2 or 3 years ago they came on our annual kickoff in 1E, and the guy who ran the org, he was really quite funny, and he it was a recorded session, but he over the screen he had basically, and his face was so expressive, he had basically said that prior to implementing 1E and putting in all these automations and so on, that people had hated IT department, and they had no respect for them, and all that. And the way he was saying it was so emotive, and then he talked about all the different proactive strategies, and he gave very clear statistics that backed up the improvement. So he talked about the the number of calls dropping month on month. He talked about the first call resolution, which is just reacting faster. It's not really proactive, it's just faster reactive, but that was also getting better. And he talked about a number of other KPIs, but at the end of it he said, and now they love us. And when he said it, his face lit up. He was just so happy about it. Another one was, there's a large bank that had, taking a specific example, they had a VPN issue. It was Cisco AnyConnect VPN. They had about, I think it was 23 or 26, I can't remember, magic things that must be aligned perfectly in order for the user to access the VPN, and the user had to access the VPN to access the network with their bank-owned devices. So any network indeed. So a lot of times when the user would click the button to join the VPN or whatever, get on the network, or it was actually auto starting, but when they went to join the network, something would be misaligned. So the machine hadn't been patched in the last 3 days, so therefore it wouldn't get that, or this critical service wasn't running, so it wouldn't connect, or this whatever. And what we did was and they had about 40,000 tickets a month. It's insane, but they have 400,000 employees who were connecting every single day. So I guess it's about 40,000 out of 1.2 million connections a month. Is not that high a percentage, but 40,000 tickets is a very, very high number. And they implemented some automations with ourselves, and what happened was, instead of waiting until the point in time when the user turns on their machine or proactively goes and presses the button to connect to the VPN, instead of waiting for that moment in time, we had automations that were running in the background, proactively checking that everything was good and fixing it in advance. So if patching hadn't happened, it would kick off patching, or if the service that needed to be running for a security tool wasn't running, it would kick off that service, or whatever. And essentially they saw those 40,000 tickets drop to like 3,500, 4,000, 90% of them went away. And the ones that were left were not from any of those 26 things that they had, automated away. They were due to new problems that were occurring, or problems they hadn't identified as being significant in the past, because they were relatively small as a percentage. But to knock out like 36,000 tickets on average a month, is huge, even for a large organization. So, you know, there are significant, clear benefits. You have less employee downtime, less, you know, service desk cost, less, you know, wasted productivity and frustration. AD mentioned, you know, you want a frictionless world. You've got less friction. People not being able to log in, not being able to connect to the network is just annoying. And having that not happen to 40,000 different people a month is a good thing.
Yeah,
Yeah.
definitely. And just thinking about some of the sort of use cases that I've dealt with in the past, not just at 1E, but also in the industry, you know, proactive isn't just about the endpoint, it's about the data center. And I think the data center is probably more mature already, you know, from a proactive point of view. They've got better, well, they've traditionally had better monitoring tools to look at the environments, track changes. And I think those practices are starting to become more familiar with desktop teams as the technology has become, you know, more pervasive in the industry, being able to monitor endpoints and get more data points back from devices. It's become easier to find problems. And you know, some of the day one scenarios that we often talk about at 1E is finding those unreported issues. So those things that customers or users are experiencing but don't actually report. You know, we've probably all had it, an application crash. You know, it happens once every 3 weeks or whatever. I'm not going to report that as a user, but it frustrates me. And with proactive strategies, we're able to build processes that allow teams to actually go out and find those issues before they happen and resolve them.
Great. Thanks, AD. Yeah, we always hear the story about your laptop might be struggling, but maybe you don't want to open IT ticket, sort of suffering in silence, right? I think a lot of us can relate to that. So I'm glad you mentioned that. And AD, back to you for our next question. I know we mentioned downtime before. Jason, you mentioned downtime. But AD, what specific practices or technologies are most effective for minimizing downtime through proactive measures?
Yeah, and I think this comes down to the hygiene pieces that Jason was talking about earlier. So think about probably one of the oldest expressions in IT is reboot and your problem goes away. So you know, just having those routine maintenance tasks happening, and that can be, you know, manually done by the end user, just being in the same, you know, it being notified that they should be rebooting their device every week or every day, depending on the policy that organizations want to do. But it's about making sure a device is in the state that the software is expecting. And as Jason said earlier, you know, we are in a continuous change world. Software is changing, software is being patched, configuration is being updated because of organization compliance rules, whether that's security or, you know, other governance reasons. So I think from what to do and sort of how to minimize that downtime, it's about establishing good hygiene, and that can be done through technologies like 1E, having those baselines of being able to report and automatically notify a user that they should be rebooting every week, every 2 weeks, depending on those policies, being able to routinely clean the disk drive. Those types of processes can really reduce any outages that we have. And you know, when, as Jason said earlier, you know, there are the unknowns, the things that haven't happened yet that we just don't know about. And when they happen, having the ability to react quickly is massively important. You know, it will happen. You know, we don't know when it will happen, but it will happen again at some point. There will be a software release or an outage of some sort that will impact users, whether that's a you know, a vendor technical release or whether that's a malicious actor doing something, and having the tooling to actually recover when you do have downtime is as important as those proactive measures.
Great. Thank you, AD. Perfect. Next question, sort of changing directions here. But Jason, I did want to ask you here, right? We've talked about helping customers or them moving from reactive to proactive, right? What are some of the common challenges organizations face when they are implementing a proactive IT strategy, and how do you think they can overcome them?
Yeah, some really frequent ones we see, and we've seen them a lot, so they're obvious to us, but they're not necessarily obvious to a lot of people. So for example, um, issues with end user communication, um, and organizations not being willing to do things like suggest that their machine should be rebooted once a week, once a month, even. The IT being really hesitant of informing end users of anything. I think if it's something that isn't going to impact an end user, you should never tell the user. But if it's something that is going to impact the end user noticeably, so what I mean by that is if we're fixing problems in advance of them ever hitting you, you don't need to know that because the problem never hit you. But if we're asking you or telling you or doing something to your machine that's going to impact your ability to use that machine for even 2 minutes, we should inform you. And it doesn't mean we shouldn't do it. We should, but we should do it in a way that is going to be uh, best for the user, right? So, if we're going to reboot, we don't just want to reboot on Wednesdays at 3 p.m. What we need to do intelligent things. We need to, identify if the user is in a Zoom call or a Teams call, and if so, don't pop up a message. But if you're not in one of those, maybe pop up a message and give them an option as to when they'd like to reboot, and they get to say now or not now, and they get that option several times, prompted over a day or two, and eventually maybe you say, sorry, we're going to reboot anyway, and you tell them that you're going to do that. Communication is key, and a lot of times organizations face internal almost political struggles that we can't do that. It's like, well, actually, we recommend you do it. We know you can do it. Lots of other people do it, and it has a positive impact on looking at the. We had a customer recently that was looking at the impact of change, and part of the problem was they'd done several things um, with our tool simultaneously, and they were looking at positive impacts of change, but they were looking at which rule led to this thing happening or not happening, as the case may be. And sometimes it was easy because you'd written something that was specific to that particular problem, but sometimes, like rebooting the machine, it wasn't easy. But we saw an impact after rebooting machines of a drop, a significant drop in the number of tickets that were coming in week on week was going down as machines were being, weekly rebooted. It's not that big an issue for the user. You can do it on a Saturday at 2 p.m., and then notify the user if they're working and all those good things. But anyway, so common challenges can be communication and, organizational challenges internally, but also a lack of knowledge is, I said earlier, the most important thing to do is find out what's driving calls. And as Adrian said, actually, it's not just about what's driving calls, it's what's causing issues. You need to have visibility on what's happening that users aren't complaining about. We give you that visibility through various different mechanisms in 1E, like experience and so on, even if it's just looking at, how many times applications are crashing and which applications are crashing. Then you can start coming up with specific things. If you don't have the knowledge, you can't take an action. So challenges that organizations face are not having the data they need to do this kind of thing. So they need to get a tool to start that journey. And the second one is even when they have a tool, even when they have the will, they might not actually, they might face internal struggles and conflicts, and might not be willing to do some things that are highly recommended because they feel that their users might get upset or might not like that. And we don't want to upset users, but we can do things typically in a way that's so smart that the users appreciate it rather than get upset by it. You'll upset them if you do stupid things like rebooting in the middle of a Teams call, which happened when I was on call with a CFO of a major organization once. He just dropped, and there was like 8 of us on the call, and he came back in 3 minutes later, spitting nails because he was like, my stupid IT department just rebooted it. And like the CIO was on the call, the stupid IT leader was on the call as well. You can't do things like that. There are smarter ways of doing them. You do need to reboot the machine, but not brutally. But yeah, those are sorts of things. So it's communication and data, and lack of both of those things.
One thing that I find when talking to organizations that are going through this, often it's a resourcing challenge as well. IT teams are in that reactive phase, trying to sort out issues, and it's difficult to actually find the time to go through that identification, finding the time to build those automations or processes. So I often think the first step is ensuring that as an organization, you're allocating the right amount of time to do that. One good way to start, particularly if you haven't got full management buy-in by the time you want to try and do these things, is set a couple of afternoons a week, particularly if you're a sort of level 3 team and you're trying to push the organization forward. Just set aside a couple of afternoons. Afternoons are normally less reactive anyway, to actually try to do that identification. Then look at trying to build out some goals. What do you want to achieve over a certain time frame? Make sure those goals that have sort of actionable results so that you can then report. And often it's that buy-in, particularly if you're, as I say, a level 3, level 4 engineer who's trying to persuade the organization to do something. Having proven results in what you're trying to address often helps with pushing that up. And then once you've got that buy-in, it's a circular piece where you're identifying those issues, you're trying to present the business value. It's very similar to what we do in product. You identify a requirement, you build the business case around why you should invest time in doing that, and then actually you can then build a roadmap around what you want to achieve in a time frame. And it really, small beginnings, small steps, does really sort of speed up as you go through that automation, because you free 10 minutes a day because you've solved something. That's 10 minutes more you can spend on the proactive elements. So start small and build up as you go.
Yeah, and measure the impact as well. So if you can actually quantify, we want to do 50 things, but we're starting with this one. We did that one, and this was the impact of it. Can we do the next one now? If you can prove what the impact of that thing, which is why it's a good idea to actually do them, I would say quickly, but individually. Do one, leave it a couple of days, measure the impact, do another. Don't do 2 on the same day. It'll be hard, unless it's very clear, like this addresses that particular problem. It can be hard to understand the map between this change and those benefits. So if it's a generic thing, leave some time. If it's specific, you can launch several specifics at once, I would say.
Yeah, and similarly, don't try and boil the ocean in one go. Some things may never need to be automated. They may never need to have that proactive nature. One-offs are one-offs. You react, you assess whether it needs to be proactive, or maybe there's a threshold that you introduce that happens on one device, one department. That's fine, but if it goes past that, then actually we're going to build in that strategy. We're going to prioritize that strategy, that remediation.
Great. Yeah, thank you both for those answers. I think it's worth noting there also will be challenges, right? Customers we work with and customers we want to work with, there will be challenges when you're making such a shift from reactive to proactive, and we see that all the time. So if there are challenges, that's bound to happen, right? And we've seen that pretty commonly with such a mind shift that's going to happen there. Next question, to move along. I know, AD, you mentioned, sometimes there will be a one-off, right? Sometimes proactive strategies cannot happen, even if you've planned as much as you can and you have implemented this proactive strategy, right? So whoever wants to answer this one, what lessons have you learned from times when proactive strategies were not possible? Example, a pretty relevant example, just about 5 weeks ago, the CrowdStrike, of course, causing outages back in July. Of course, couldn't plan for something like that. But what have you guys kind of learned from this or seen when, unfortunate incidents like this do occur?
Yeah, I think it's that's a great example of the unknown unknowns, right? You can't predict that something like that is going to happen, but you can be as prepared as possible as an organization to react to the unknown, right? So if you have tooling in place that allows you to make changes on all of your machines in real time, that's fantastic. And that's one of the things that our tool can do. That's not going to help you if those machines are blue screening and dying before that, the OS is going away before it gets the load, the wonderful tool that is the 1E client. So there are actual strategies that you can do to even help in that circumstance. And one of them, for example, is we have this in an instruction, you can run it, and it will basically set so that in safe mode with networking, the 1E client will run. So in the CrowdStrike example, essentially you had to reboot the machines and go into safe mode. You could use with networking or without, either one would work. And then you had to delete a file essentially and then restart the machine, and the problem would go away. The problem was that people had to do that manually because you couldn't get into safe mode any other way, right? Or when it went into safe mode, users were then being talked through how to go and delete that file, which wasn't necessarily easy for all of the users. And it was a mess. There was local admin problems, and that's why it took days and weeks for some organizations to recover. So if you had the 1E client, for example, able to be running in safe mode, when the machine rebooted and went into safe mode, you could have it automatically delete the file. The user didn't need to do anything. And then just reboot the machine again and everything's back to normal. So it doesn't matter what the next example is of a problem occurring. It's always going to be beneficial to be able to have, for example, the 1E client running in safe mode with networking. Also, by the way, that you'd never have it running in both, right? Because if there was a problem, heaven forbid, never happened, but never say never, with the 1E client itself, you could boot into safe mode without networking and deal with it. Okay, so it's a safe way to give you a massively enhanced capabilities when something like that happens. So having the ability to react, ideally if the OS is functioning, that's good. But even when the OS is kind of fundamentally broken, you can still use, if you have the right kind of tooling, you can still use it to help dig you out of the unknown unknowns when they occur, when they suddenly become known, and okay, this is our approach, we got to fix it. Having the right tooling in place is critical, and that's part of being proactive, I suppose, as well.
Mm-hmm. And I think the other element that I think most organizations have a reasonable proactive approach is patch management today. But even in a patch, well orchestrated patch management strategy, there will always be times where there's a 0 day out there. And how do you react fast in a 0 day? What the first thing you need to know is, am I impacted? And if you're not monitoring for certain criteria, how do you do that today across large organizations? So again, that real-time nature of being able to go out and at least assess, get situational awareness of, am I impacted? Oh, we don't use that software, great. Or actually we're on a later version, great. That can be stuff that's in standard systems management tools. But if it's something that's new, that's impacting the latest version, how do you know? How can you have confidence that, one, we need to react, or two, actually we can sit safe? And I was on a call with a customer that wasn't a CrowdStrike customer, and in a weird way, they were so happy that they weren't a CrowdStrike customer that day. But it was a wake-up call for them as well. They have a dependency of a different tool, and I think the industry in general is going to have to look at how that type of definition file, how those types of updates are sent out, so it doesn't impact everybody. But when you are impacted for different scenarios, then definitely having the ability to react fast, because you're not always going to cover every base, is really important.
Yeah, and technically, just for anyone technical on the call that is interested, the 1E client doesn't run in kernel mode, so can't do the same thing. It's one of the reasons we haven't really had blue screen problems ever is that we run a system in Windows. We don't, kernel mode is more likely to cause that. But Adi said something there that brought something to mind as well, which is, for example, there are certain things. An example of being proactive in response to a 0 day is, there was one, it was called Bad Rabbit. It was a few years ago. And what it did was it dropped a file of a given name into a given folder. And so to the first step of, am I impacted? You could very quickly just search with the 1E client. If you have a real-time tool, you can understand in seconds, do I have any machines? I've got 68,000 machines across the world. Do any of them have this weird file name on this folder? And if none of them have, well, none of them are impacted. And if some of them have, you can react to those ones that have been impacted, quarantine them, or do other things with the tool. But the really cool thing was that if you create a file of that name on that, on each machine, on every machine, and you lock that file so it can only be written to by a specific type of user, then essentially if the bad guys managed to get in and tried to write the file, they would fail at the first step because they can't add a file that already exists that you can't write over. So essentially, their bad file was there, but it had zero content, so it didn't do anything. So their whole attack failed. So you can be proactive in response to a 0-day attack as well. Like if you know that these things are out there, you can run an instruction or set up a rule, an automation, which prevents a bad actor from actually executing a particular type of attack against you, because basically you were proactive. You put the file there before they came in. In the CrowdStrike example, you deleted the driver file before the machine, before it was actually restarted, or the machine tried to bounce that service, and it caused the blue screen. So some of our customers had actually used our tech without needing to have it running in safe mode of networking to proactively prevent being impacted by the CrowdStrike thing. As soon as they understood what it was, they basically disabled the anti-tampering and deleted the file. And then they didn't have the issue. We had one bank in the US, about 80,000 people working in it, that basically didn't have any impact because they had proactively used the tool to do that. So having the right tools in place for when the unknowns occur, and knowing how to use them, the critical thing as well. Knowing how to use them, knowing how to create a customized instruction, how to build the extensions that you can build within the tool is very important as well.
Mm-hmm. I'm just thinking about another bank example from that day. They were actually using the 1E interface to find impacted devices, so devices that had been online that day that were no longer online, and that allowed them to actually target resources to the devices that were impacted, rather than just having a scattergun approach across every device. They were able to focus and get their environment back up really quickly. So yeah, it's that recovery piece, I think, is the big lesson when proactive strategies aren't enforceable.
Great, thank you both. Next question here. Are there any recommended best practices or frameworks for maintaining a proactive IT approach over time? Jason, any ideas there?
So
I'm happy.
I think,
Sorry, Jason, I was going to say I'm happy to sort of take that one. I think, and the reason for that is from a product role point of view, we sort of do this type of activity all the time as we're assessing feature request requirements. But in the context of sort of reactive, proactive, I think that the single thing is about continuous improvement, continuous assessment of your environment to make sure that you're able to build the best value for your organization. So a couple of things are that continuous improvement, always looking. IT is in flux all the time. We stated that earlier today. It's about how do you evolve with that. So as that life cycle continues, you will have events that happen, and that can be triggered by a user, can be triggered by monitoring. But you assess and you build the sort of manual reactions. You're fixing the problem once. Then you're building a roadmap of value that you're adding, and you're building that automation based on those criteria of, how often does it impact me? How easy is it to fix? How impactful is it when it happens? And you're building those automations, and then when those items happen, events happen in the future for those devices or that process, you're able to then respond before it becomes an issue to the users. So it's about that circular piece. The important thing is that over time, some of those automations, some of that proactive IT becomes irrelevant. So you need to have a process where you're reviewing those automations, make sure that they're still relevant, and you remove them if they're no longer relevant. So as I say, continuous that loop all the time. Yeah, I think that's the main, from my side, that's the real main thing. From a framework point of view, think about agile processes. We've been using them in engineering and product for some time. They do work. It's about setting those small work timeframes, ensuring that you estimate the work, make sure you're getting that value out of the work all of the time. consider, as I said earlier, setting goals and looking at results. A great framework for that is OKRs, so objectives and key results, and that's where you're able to, at the end of the sprint or time frame that you're considering working towards, you go back and see whether the objectives actually make the results that you're expecting. So, are you getting the improvements that you expected? I think they're the main sort of frameworks that I would suggest people use as they start on this strategy move.
So one of that customer in South Africa that I mentioned briefly earlier, they actually did a really cool thing where they just plotted the number of IT incidents reported over time as a raw number, okay? And they also plotted the number of automations they were running with 1E as another raw number, and they put them on the same graph in the same time period, and essentially you got an X. Okay, the more 1E automations were running, the fewer incidents were being reported by end users, and that's that wonderfully visible impact, and it's not hard to do. They're two pretty easy numbers to get at, and then that justifies the efforts you've been putting into driving automation, and as you said earlier, it gives you more time to actually to actually do things as well, right? Because the more you eliminate the firefighting, the more time you have to be proactive. And we haven't used that phrase on this, but that is basically what reactive is. It's firefighting. It's reacting to what happens when something goes whoomp, right? So we want to have fewer fires and more sprinkler systems.
Great. Thank you, Jason. Thank you, Adi. I apologize, I had to go off camera there for everyone. My dog was going a little crazy. You give her a treat, you tell her to just keep it down for an hour. I don't think she got the message, so apologies for that. But thank you guys for that answer there. So that is the end of our questions for today, our sort of pre-planned questions. If anyone has any other questions, definitely feel free to put those in the Q&A box, and we will answer those for you shortly. Here, no questions yet, but there was one question I wanted to ask both of you guys here, which is, can proactive strategies be applied to hardware as well as software to ensure comprehensive coverage?
Yeah, I actually noticed the title of this was to avoid software outages, but of course hardware outages are arguably worse, because if your PC doesn't work, it doesn't matter if your software is fine. But absolutely it can be. There's a solution that we've built called 1E for device refresh, which is somewhat misnomered because it does an awful lot more than that. What it's really about is understanding if users have machines that are the right machines for them, so it can recommend reassigning machines based on hardware not being sufficient for the users. By monitoring things like CPU and RAM, are they hammering their CPU? Are they hammering RAM a lot? If they are, is that the right device for that user? It can monitor for hardware issues by counting and responding to Windows events relating to hardware, and suggest that machines might need specific repairs for specific problems, and react to them. So we can understand things like if a machine is in warranty or not, and if it's still in warranty, we can recommend that you, I don't know, replace the battery because the battery health is low, or that you need to buy a new disk for this user because they're low on disk space and there's no, we can't free any more from that device. There can be small things that can be done at low cost or no cost that will extend the lifetime and value of a device and minimize the number of outages a user is having with a hardware device. And essentially, this thing monitors for 20 plus of those and automatically groups machines into needing to be re-imaged or replaced or reassigned, or other rewords. Retained is the one you want to keep it in, which is where you want to, there's nothing wrong with it. So yeah, that's one example, and I think it's a great example of being able to improve hardware life expectancy and value, and reduce number of hardware issues for users, which is pretty crucial. It also reduces carbon footprint as well, because if you buy a new machine for somebody on average, that's 326 kilos of carbon to produce a device. And if you can leave off doing that and extend the lifetime of a device from 3 years to 4 or 5, you're reducing the amount of carbon that is being consumed by the organization or produced. So it's very good stuff.
Great. Thank you, Jason. And one more question from me. I think 80, I'll send this one over to you. Can't forget about you. How can a proactive IT strategy improve customer satisfaction? And are there any metrics to track this improvement?
Yes, so definitely, we've got evidence internally from our customers about the improvements, and Jason sort of touched on one example with a customer in South Africa. The important thing is getting that feedback from the customer, the end user, the employee, about how they're feeling about the service that's being offered from IT. And historically, that's been sort of a survey that's sent out every year that you get that type of response. But with the 1E tooling, we do have the ability to send out, we call them sentiment surveys. How is the user feeling about different categories? It's quite an agile surveying tool, very lightweight, designed to be sort of non-intrusive to the user. So that's one key aspect, and the other key aspect is in the sort of metrics that we gather as well, and we see as we introduce more proactive measures, we're seeing scores across our, we call it a DEX score ultimately, but it's across 4 categories. That sentiment category, is the device performant, is it stable, and is it reactive in the way that the user is expecting? So those results improve over time as well. So yeah. There was actually a question from one of the attendees, basically saying that he's not familiar with our service. Is our solution an agent that runs on endpoints? So yes, it is an agent that runs on endpoints. The uniqueness is that it's in a persistent connection as well. So from that reactive piece, we're able to react to scenarios in real time because we've already got that established connection. From a proactive point of view, we have an engine as part of that agent that will continuously monitor configuration. Can either be event-based or time-based, and it also has the ability to prompt the user. So that scenario Jason was talking about earlier with asking the user about, I'm about to make a change to your device, are you okay? That could be, cleaning disk space. It could be asking them to reboot at a certain time. So we have all of that capability in the 1E client today.
I think another key thing about it is that the endpoint can operate completely offline. In other words, if that user has taken their machine to the woods and is enjoying a day of no internet connectivity whatsoever, and they turn their machine on and there's something that we detect is wrong, we will still fix that thing. We'll make that proactive change so the user gets to, I don't know, do whatever they want to do offline while they're turning the machine on in the woods. And when they come back online, it will sync up and say, this happened and we fixed it, rather than the brain living in the cloud and the machine having an issue and not knowing how to deal with it when there's no connection. And that facilitates a number of real value business cases, like fixing a VPN issue. If the VPN is required to connect to the network, and it won't start, how do you fix it if you don't have any intelligence on the endpoint? So if we can fix 26 known issues with VPNs before they start, then you don't have that negative impact in the first place, and you proactively saved the user from having to report a ticket to say, hey, my VPN won't start and I need someone to do something for me. So yeah, there's a number of things, but it is all an agent, non-kernel mode, runs on the endpoint, and does some really interesting things at ridiculous speeds, simultaneously running on 150,000 endpoints, providing data. It's fantastic.
Great. Thank you. That's all the questions that we have. If you have any questions about this, feel free to put it in the Q&A. We'll keep that up and reach out to you separately there. Otherwise, thank you very much, Jason. Thank you very much, Adi, for your answers and all the content that you talked about today. Really appreciate you having you on here today. But with that, we will wrap up the webinar here. And thank you everyone for joining. Really appreciate the attendance and hope you have a nice rest of the day. But thank you very much.